latest in our webinars together with the Maritime Authority of Jamaica and Ship Management International. And welcome really to IMO World Maritime Day. The role of the seafarer and the importance of the environment and the role the shipping plays in that is very, very important. And we wanted really to take on the theme, the IMO theme of our ocean, our obligation and our opportunity, to really sort of have a little bit of a discussion today really around those areas there. All very, very important. The environment, decarbonisation, the seafarer, the social aspect, vitally important. And shipping is changing, as we know, with innovation and digitalisation happening as well. So there's a lot of activity happening in global shipping, and it affects all elements of the industry in different ways. Just really as a matter of housekeeping, the webinar will last precisely an hour. It is being recorded, which is good. So, and it will be edited and then put on the Ship Management International website, as well as the Maritime Authority of Jamaica website. So your colleagues who are unable to come in today will be able to download the webinar, and we'll also cover it editorially in Ship Management International as well in the next issue. We're going to start, well, actually, just before we start, actually, just to say to the delegates who are coming into the room, you'll see at the bottom of your screen here, this lovely Zoom webinar screen, that you have a Q&A and you have a chat facility. Any questions, please just whiz them on the Q&A. I'm sufficiently experienced in all of this. I will pick up some of the questions that you have. I'd actually encourage you to do it, because some of your questions are excellent, and they enable us to actually make sure we don't miss some of the points, but also enable us to have a little bit of good pace in there as well. And any questions that we're unable to answer, we'll endeavour to answer offline after the webinar and maybe send over to you. So welcome everybody. My name is Sean Maloney, Chief Executive of Elaborate Communications and a number of other things. You might have seen me last week at London International Shipping Week running around. And also I publish a Ship Management International magazine as well. So I'm going to ask our dear panelists today to introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask them just for 2 minutes, we can be a little bit strict on that, to really introduce yourselves, but also touch a little bit on the theme today of our ocean, our obligation and our opportunity, and what it means to you from your perspective. All right, so then we can then go into the general questions. And again, just reminding delegates, any question you have, whiz it on the Q&A. Use the Q&A rather than the chat. The chat goes to the panelists as well, but it just keeps it all into one sort of box. So on the Q&A would be great. So panelists, welcome. Nice to see you all in different parts of the world. That's the power of the internet and the webinars, which is great. I'm going to go left to right, and I'm very pleased to say it means we have ladies before gentlemen. So Sharon, if I can start with you, if you could introduce yourself, and then a little bit about the theme.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sean, and thank you for allowing me this fantastic opportunity. So my name's Sharon Coveney. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive of the Merchant Navy Welfare Board, and we're the umbrella charity for the UK's merchant navy and fishing fleets. And basically, we're committed to improving seafarers' welfare by raising standards through collaborative industry initiatives and innovative support programmes with our 47 members. We're also, in addition to that, we're also the UK's National Seafarers Welfare Board. And in practice, we've been fulfilling this role since we were founded in 1948, but in 2021, we were appointed by the MLC, or the Maritime Coast Guard Agency, to fulfil this role on behalf of the UK. What it means today, so our ocean, our obligation, our opportunity, well, I'd say an important dimension for us is the welfare of seafarers. With regards to one ocean, every ocean, over a million, there are over 1 million seafarers at sea, carrying more than 90% of our world trade. The seafarers are the human link in the global supply, and they're also the human link in protecting the ocean itself, we feel. Sorry, Sean, you're going to have to, I haven't got a timer here, so you just have to give me a little prompt if I'm going over my time here. So just really our obligation, just as we recognise duty of care to our ocean, to protect it from pollution, overfishing, climate change, etc., we have an equal duty of care to the people who dedicate their lives to the sea. The Maritime Labour Convention 2006 is sometimes called the Seafarers' Bill of Rights, but those rights only mean something if governments, ship owners, and the wider community, maritime community, take them seriously. In regards to opportunities, well, here's where we think the positive side shines through. Seafarers today face a wave of new expectations in technology, to demand the mastery of complex digital systems of today. Compliance, which brings increasing layers of regulation and inspection, and decarbonation as well, which requires new learning regarding new fuels, new machinery, and new ways of working.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to stop you there, Sharon.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. And with a few elements here that we can touch on. So thank you.
Thank you.
Patricia, nice to see you and welcome. If you could introduce yourself and a little bit of a sort of commentary on the subject at hand.
Thank you very much. And I'm really happy to be here this morning. Thank you very much for the invitation to join. I'm a former executive director of the International Trade Center in Geneva, which is the joint organization of the World Trade Organization and the UN. And since then, since coming back to Jamaica, I am the chairperson of our Trade Facilitation Task Force, which is a joint public-private sector entity joined up to not only implement the Trade Facilitation Agreement, but also to look at all of the wider areas that impact on trade. So definitely the whole business of the ocean is critical for what we're talking about this morning. And so I'm very happy and pleased to be there. I'm also from a shipping family. So my family's been in the shipping industry for the last 100 years. So I've been listening to all of the ins and outs of the shipping business for my lifetime, which is thankfully not 100 years yet. but and also in the fishing industry. So I have lived to a large extent all of the issues that have been faced by the shipping industry from various perspectives. So the topic today, our ocean, our opportunities and our obligations, very, very, very important, because in terms of the oceans, I think that this is our inheritance. I see this, as our livelihood. And if we think about it that way, then I think we will address many of the challenges that we're facing now with a different view. Because if we're coming from the perspective that this is not just something for my own wealth creation, but it is something which has to be sustainable, which has to be, has to look at all of the issues related to the environment, the question of climate change, then I think we have a different perspective from which to find solutions. From those people who are only looking at the negatives, it's very difficult to convince them that that this is something that we need to work on together. But I'm here this morning because I'm very much engaged in trying to see how we can work together jointly to make sure that we don't overfish, that we don't extract from the oceans until there are no more resources. And that we look after the people who are engaged in these industries in a way which allows them to have a good livelihood. And so there is a thinking called the Blue Commons, which is really about the joint inheritance of the ocean. And if we think about the ocean in that regard, then I think that all of the pieces come together and we can join in with the opportunities, but not forget about our obligations. So
Okay.
I think I've met the 2 minutes.
No, that's great, and you're raising a number of points there. What I don't want to do is take away all of the thunder, because you've got some really, really good points there that you might want to bring in as the questions come through. I like the element there, the joint inheritance. I think that's important there, Patricia. But thank you very much indeed. I'm going to come on to Fabio. Fabio, nice to see you. Fabio Ballini, Associate Professor at Royal Maritime University. Can I ask you just to introduce yourself again? A couple of minutes.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sen, and I'm very happy to be here in this very, important discussion webinar, right? And as I mentioned, I'm an associate professor at the World Maritime University, that is a specialized agency of the United Nations under the International Maritime Organization. And I would say that this theme, our ocean, our obligation, our opportunity, is a very powerful reminder, right? That ocean is both our greatest resource, but also we need to share this responsibility, right? Today, I will try to contribute more on the decarbonization side, right? How the policy and the regulation at the international level, right, it can be used as a leverage, as a driver, in order to protect our ocean. Myself, I'm more into the port. I'm a port specialist, and also to keep and facilitate the ocean, right? To keep our ocean safe. I would say that it's also an important role about the stakeholder, right? Or the different stakeholders that are together, the different interests and different needs. But when we talk about the ocean, we have one common goal, right? To preserve our ocean. So I would say that on one side, we have the climate change, right? But also what are the leverage in terms of climate finance? What are the potential mechanisms that could facilitate this leverage in order to decarbonize the shipping sector, so to make it more sustainable, but also to create a business model on that, right? So that's, I think, are the leverage topic that I might be able to, and happy to discuss on that. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Fabio. Some good points there that we'll touch on. Christopher, can I bring you in? You're next. Again, introduce yourself just for the delegates, and as well as for the listeners later on as well, downloading the webinar, and a little bit of a view on what's going on your views. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean, and welcome to all of the listeners. My name is Christopher Corbin. I'm the coordinator with the United Nations Environment Program's Cartagena Convention Secretariat, based right here in Kingston, Jamaica. We are one of the UNEP-administered regional seas programs. So we cover 28 countries in the wider Caribbean region, all bordering the Caribbean Sea. And when I think about the theme for today, it's very consistent with our own mission as a secretariat: protecting the sea, sustaining our future. So whether it relates to tourism, to fisheries, to adaptation to climate change, or even for this region, maritime transportation and trade, the need to have a very close working relationship between the maritime sector as well as the environment sector is critical. In terms of opportunities, UNEP has had a very long and productive, I would say, collaboration with the IMO at the global level. We're doing it at the regional level, but as has been mentioned by some of my other panelists, I think it's now, how do we work more closely together in terms of the overall sustainable development of regions globally? So how do we catalyze more sustainable economic development? How do we ensure that policies and regulations are coherent and consistent with each other? And how we really focus on improving lives of local communities. So I'm looking forward to share a bit of that perspective.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Christopher. I do appreciate that. DOÐUKAN, coming on to you, if I may. And you are, from one of the world's largest ship supply companies, and you are actually looking after the seafarers. You are there making sure that they are well fed, and indeed the ship supply sector in the past has played a big important role to play in abandonment of seafarers. When seafarers are abandoned, ship suppliers in those ports often come in to the aid of seafarers as well. And if you can just introduce yourself a little bit more than I have, and a little bit on your views on the issue here at stake today.
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr. Maloney. Hello, everyone. My name is DOÐUKAN ŞIMŞEK from Istanbul, Turkey. I am the Deputy General Manager of the company. As a ship supplier company, our perspective, we're going to come up with the seafarers' well-being, of course. I mean, we are all after it, all after about it. And we are serving more than 100 countries and 1,000 ports in a month. So, of course, our company started as a family business, but after 40 years, we are trying to be more corporate in a way. And our obligation to the oceans and seafarers' well-being is our job. So I will give my perspective from that side in this webinar. So after all, thank you very much for the opportunity again.
Absolute pleasure on that. And just a reminder to delegates, please, any questions you want, whiz them through on the Q&A down the bottom, and we'll go through on that. I want to really touch on the issue of shipping's obligation to seafarers and to the environment, and really ask the question: where is it succeeding, and where is it failing? And I'm going to go to Fabio first on that, and I know you'll sort of have your and there will be slants on there. You might want to focus a bit more on decarbonisation, and certainly Sharon might want on the seafarer side. But where are we succeeding as an industry when it comes to our obligations to the environment, for instance, as far as you're concerned, and where are we failing?
Thank you very much for the very good question. I will try to give a general, let's say, overview on that. I would say that shipping carrying, let's say, dual responsibility on that, right? We have to one side is to safeguard the people, right, and the planet. So that is when I talk about the people, of course, is people work on the shipping side, but as I mentioned before, also port at the gateway of let's say of the economy too, right? So I think it's also good to consider this dimension. We talk about the people, and then of course we have a planet, right? We have only one planet, right? So we need to take care about this planet, and we see that the progress, I would say, through stronger, more let's say global international safety regulation, right? But also, as we discussed in the beginning, at the international level, when I talk about the decarbonization, IMO is working on that, right, with the net zero strategy, and also broader, we have a regional approach on that. So I would say there is a sort of corporate responsibility also effort between the company involved, the different stakeholders along the supply chain. So this, I would say, it's a positive trend, right? And also, I think that all this regulation and policy can also leverage another factor. So they increase also the competitive advantage, right? So I would say that there is a sort of movement along the different stakeholders on that. But at the same time, also challenges remain, right? For instance, the new fuels, the new, let's say, alternative fuels, they also require a more skill and upskill, right? All these seafaring crew, right? So that is also another opportunity one side, right? Because training component can play an important role on that, right? But also is also a pressure on that, right? So how these can align the training component with the uptaking of the, let's say, the new fuels and alternative fuels that are under discussion on that, right? So I think that is also an important side, right? Because we don't have the silver bullet yet, right? So we don't know which is the most prominent alternative fuels on that. But I would say that to compare, let's say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there is already a sort of basket of options, right? That already ship ownership company are make their own strategy on that, right? So I would say the real challenge, or let's say the real opportunity, is to balancing one side economic pressure, right, with also ethical responsibility, because ocean are our life, right, on that, but also how the industry can find a common grounds on that, right? So how we can create anyway welfare, right, without compromise our planet. So that's, I would say, it's in general on the shipping side. And touch upon on port, I would say that since most of 80% of more of the trade go through port, right? So port also has an important and pivotal role in order to streamline all these goods, right? But also to accommodate these new vessels, right? Because these vessels will change, so port need to provide the bunkering facility on that in order to facilitate the decarbonization and become more a sustainable ecosystem, right? I would conclude that it's important, in my opinion, to look in a holistic view, right? So with all these kind of actors that gravitate around, right, on the supply chain, and with different needs and different expectations, taking consideration that we have only one planet. Of course, ocean is an important pillar on that.
But just touching on one of the points you made there, I mean, when you look at shipping as an industry, ship owners, ship managers, you've got them bringing in the ports as well. It's highly fragmented. You've got companies that are racing ahead, embracing all the technologies, looking at the new fuels, already building dual fuel ships, really taking, the whole issue of decarbonisation and the environment very seriously. You've got other ports that are implementing digital systems where a vessel can report in plenty of time all about its cargo manifest. So the ship is in port for less time than it needs to be, because everything is there, it comes in, it's cleared immediately, offloads, goes out, rather than staying there for an additional 5 or 6 hours, going through all the paperwork while it's steaming away and smoke is coming out of its funnel. But then you've got other ports that aren't doing that. You've got other elements of the shipping industry that don't embrace digitalization at all. A lot of the Greek ship owners don't embrace digitalization. That's got to be an area where the industry is failing, isn't it?
Yeah, that is a very good point. I also agree with you about the ecosystem is quite fragmented, right? There is not, let's say, an homogeneous, let's say, a coherent system, right? Due to political reason, due geographical region, think about Pacific Island, right? And all these SEED and LDC also is another important part of that. And the digitalization can play an important role on that in order to increase the connectivity, right? The connectivity of the different, let's say, mode of transport, right? So that is also a good angle to discuss on that, right? So the digitalization can facilitate on that, but I think that before the digitalization, we need to have an infrastructure, right, that is able to, let's say, flow the goods, not only port the ship interface. So as you highlighted, Sean, is also there is in the backyard. So let's say also the connection between port and interland, right, where they could create a bottleneck. So as you can see, it's quite complex, but I do believe that this kind of exercise that regulation put in place, this pressure, this drive that the regulation put in place, they will bring a sort of effort in different regions of the world, right? And then slowly they will adapt on that. So, and also I will also think that climate finance, right, can help, right? So these economic incentive, or let's say this kind of revenue generation, right, can help also countries that are not at the moment has a favorable, let's say, infrastructure, or let's say economic, let's say, force on that. So there are a lot of fragmentation, right? But I do believe, just for conclude, that the regulation is an important driver, right? That make everybody think about and also listen better our own infrastructure.
Okay, I'm going to bring Christopher in next, and then Patricia on the environment element. Touching on the regulation there, you've got the new zero framework that's going to be discussed at the IMO in October. You've already had the US saying it's not going to be participating in and what have you. And if I go back 20 years, 25 years, the subject that I was debating and discussing with people was this interplay between regional legislation, regulation versus international regulation. And a lot of criticism was levied at the IMO being too slow, all this sort of side of it. And you've got the US Coast Guard, or you've got the Commission powering ahead with their regulations. Touching on what FABIO was saying, with an eye to that question about the successes and the failures as far as our obligations are concerned, and looking at that whole issue of regionalization versus international regulation, how does it all fit in, Christopher? What's your thoughts on that? Because does it just need to go ahead? And I think even Arsenio Dominguez said last week during London International Shipping Week, when asked if the new zero framework would not be adopted, he said, "I don't have an answer to that because it's not on my agenda." So, what's the answer to all of this in your view?
Thanks, Sean. And I think it's we work at the regional level, and we've certainly seen the value of the international global, and the fact that really and truly where the action happens is at the national level. So I before getting to the decarbonization, where I have a bit of a personal reflection, I wanted to maybe touch upon things that seem to be working, and perhaps why have they worked? And I look at the whole ballast water convention. That was a very critical issue for us in this region, concern about ballast water impacting on coastal and marine environment, on coral reefs, on mangroves, and also a recognition that this was something that needed a bit of global push, global pressure, which was seen in the context of the ballast water convention. I think it also recognized that industry needed to be the leader of this in terms of the solutions. And what we've seen, certainly in the wider Caribbean, is this sort of trickle its way down as far as then what happens at the regional level and then what happens at the national level. In a way, I would say that the same thing has been positively reflected in how we've responded to oil spills through the various IMO global multilateral agreements relating to oil spills. A lot of focus, I think, first of all, on building the capacity at national and regional level to be able to give effect to these global agreements, and then having the linkages between environmental related multilateral environmental agreements and shipping related multilateral environmental agreements. And now comes to the $1 million question in terms of what happens when there is not that coherence and commitment. And again, I think both IMO now and UNEP will say we are responding to the needs of the parties and the needs of the member states. But what it does allow I see there needs to be a need also to recognize what can be done at regional level and really push the regional agenda, push the national agenda, form those coalitions of like-minded, and therefore have an interchange with then what happens at the global level. We've certainly seen value in some of these global commitments, particularly for small island developing states, particularly for developing countries, in helping to drive change, in helping to build capacity, in helping in responding. But I think now we we need to change the narrative a little bit and also have what's happening at the national level and the regional level driving the change at global level. So just a couple of thoughts on that. Maybe the one I haven't mentioned, which I think is important now, is how do we deal with this issue of litter and waste that is coming from the maritime sector versus the land-based sector. Again, it's not about pointing fingers. I think there needs to be a recognition, but that both maritime and land-based activities contribute pollution to the environment. And how are we going to work together in a more synergized way to address it, especially if we have a situation where maritime generated waste ends up having to be dealt with at country level.
Now, are you talking about maritime waste that's from the ships, or that ends
Mainly
up
from the ships, yes. So from the operations of the ships, from cruise ships, in some cases from cargo ships. So again, there are IMO regulations and agreements that deal with that. But when it comes into territorial waters, then you need to bring in some form of national enforcement. And I want to support then FABIO in terms of it's as strong as, in many cases, the national regulations and enforcement. So that part is important.
Okay, I'm going to quickly bring in DOÐUKAN here on this, because the ship supply sector pays a lot of attention to, its role in I think it's scope 3, as far as packaging is concerned, as far as all of those aspects are concerned. You are on mute, DOÐUKAN, so you probably have to put yourself on unmute. But how important is the environment to the ship supply sector, would you say, when you're servicing the needs of the ships and you're getting your products out there onto the vessels? How much of an eye does the industry or the sector put on that?
Yeah. So we've been trying to make our supplies and using the technology side. I mean, in the more than 5 years, almost doubled. So we are trying to make supplies more efficient and more sustainable way. For example, we are making a partnership with a company called Aquarex, which is a remineralization company for the water supplies. As you know, it's a lot of plastic using in the water supplies, and the resource of water is limited in the ship. So we would like to make a good impact on the remineralization water system in the ships, and it became a lot of excitement on our customers. So they would like to use it a lot. And also, we are trying to be the one who will make the Turkish seas in as a supplier for the drone supplies. It's because it's all electrical and there is no fossil fuels inside of it. So we will be the leader for that kind of supplies in the whole country. I know there is some experiments on Singapore ports, but in case of Turkey, we will be the first one. So that's I can say.
Okay. Quite interestingly, the ice cream van has just turned up outside, so you might well hear it tinkling along. Patricia, let me bring you in as well on this, and bring us back a little bit to that original question. When it comes to issues like the obligation to seafarers, and I'm going to come on to Sharon to talk about the seafarers in particular, but in the environment, where is shipping succeeding or where is it failing, would you say? What's on your sort of dashboard when it comes to that aspect?
Well, thank you very much, because this is a very hot topic in the Caribbean right now, leading up to the meeting of the IMO in October. We have a peculiar situation in the Caribbean where we have what is called short sea shipping. Yeah. Because our islands are so close together that we don't benefit from the calculations that were done in the IMO originally, where they were looking at, a ship coming all the way from China to Europe, something like that. So our vessels in the Caribbean are generally quite old, and we have this, and obviously they don't have the benefit of a long distances in order to be able to use less fuel. Yeah. So that's a peculiar problem that we have in the Caribbean. Also, we have ports in the Eastern Caribbean that deal with both cruise ships and freighters. So you have a situation where the cargo ships are coming in, but they have to wait until the cruise ships have moved out of the port in order to get in. So then again, you have all of this time sitting there at the port where you're generating carbon. So we have been looking and trying to find a Caribbean solution to what it is that we're facing, and within the context of all of that. And when we look at what the new rules are proposing, the costs that are going to be carried onto all of our economies is phenomenal, and the ability for us to afford to put in all of the infrastructure which is going to be necessary to meet these new obligations is beyond most of the countries in the Caribbean. So the whole question of climate finance is critical and important. How are we going to finance this transformation? Are we going to be given the time in order to make this transformation? Because we are looking at opportunities like Trinidad and Tobago with their green ammonia. We're looking at Dominica, which has geothermal energy. So the idea of shore power in some of these Eastern Caribbean countries could come from geothermal energy. And certainly when we see opportunities, but the question is, how do we make them happen? Because in many of our tiny islands, I mean, Jamaica is different because it's bigger. It's already an international port. But in the Eastern Caribbean, you're talking about tiny economies, and how are they going to finance this?
Is that going to have a detrimental effect, do you think, Patricia? I mean, is that going to be holding?
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be horrendous on our economies. The pass on to our economies, we are figuring it's going to be, anywhere up to even 20% increase in costs in many of our islands. So this is going to be, the knock-on effect is going to be very important, even in our tourism industry, and also in for our cargo facilities. Now, very important is how we find solutions together, because the tiny islands may not be interesting as a financeable product. But if we're looking uniquely at a series of countries that we could finance in a package, maybe that might be more interesting to global finances if we can make that happen. So all of these questions are being thrown up right now, and we're very, very much engaged in that. But besides IMO, I think there are other things that are happening which are very interesting. One of our fishing companies came together recently, and for the first time in the world, our conch industry has Marine Stewardship Council's certification, the only one in the world. So we are looking at sustainability seriously and looking for solutions. And these solutions cannot happen company by company. This is what we're learning. Although we are competitors, we have to join forces in order to solve the problem for all of us. And I'm also engaged with an entity, an NGO in Jamaica here, that is looking at how we have a conservation area, a fishery conservation area. But what that has done is prevented the fisher folk from fishing inside of this conservation area. So we've literally taken the livelihoods of these people away without compensating them in any way. So we have had to be reversing our thinking about how do we provide nature-based solutions and alternative livelihoods for these fisher folk. And so it takes, again, a grouping of thinking, but engagement of the communities in this whole process in order to find solutions which will balance both the conservation and the regenerative type of industries that will also lift the livelihoods of our fisher folk. So whether you're talking about the oceans itself, whether you're talking about something like tourism, or you're talking about the whole business of fishery, artisanal fishermen folk, these are all questions that need to be solved, looking at the whole picture. And what we've seen, especially if I go back to the IMO, is that we have one part of government going ahead and agreeing to, sign off on these IMO regulations. But we have public policy which will not allow us to implement some of the solutions. So there's a disjoint inside of government. And this whole question of looking at things holistically comes forward to us as we try to find solutions and to find a way forward. So we're very ambitious. We're pushing for the Port of Jamaica to become a logistics hub. And that in itself means that we have to answer these green questions. How are we going to finance the shore power that we're going to need? How are we going to make sure that our ports are transformed in a green way, that our truckers join in, and that we're looking again at the full cycle as opposed to just, meeting one obligation and not all of them.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to bring Sharon in, and Sharon, thank you for your patience and you've listened to everything that's gone on there. And we just to remind the delegates, my old friend Mark Neuterman has sent a question in which I will pose in a second. And thank you, Mark, for that. But please, any questions you have, Sharon, from a seafarer perspective, and touching on what DOÐUKAN was saying there with well-being and what have you as well being so crucial. Where do you think the industry has succeeded and where is it failing?
I think shipping's obviously got a dual obligation to ensure the welfare and safety of seafarers, but also to protect the environment. But despite that, no matter what technology advances or environmental pressures that are made, without the seafarers, there wouldn't be any safe passage or cargoes. So on the seafaring side, I think shipping companies are now, or the countries that have ratified MLC are required under international frameworks to provide safe working practices for seafarers, like safe conditions, fair pay, adequate leave, medical care, etc., and also access to shore-based welfare facilities and services. But where they're succeeding is often in regulatory compliance to MLC, and most large companies are adhering to MLC, and they're investing in safety and training, and increasingly providing mental health support for crew, although there's still a lot of work to be done on that front. And also access to communications as well, although, where it's evident through we have a MiFi project, which the welfare societies take MiFi devices on board ships when they're in port, so they can access communication, and contact their families and friends, etc. And that pilot project's been in for 4 or 5 years now, and believe it or not, last year we had the highest usage of it. The reports from the crew are that although they've got access to Wi-Fi, it's expensive. It's still expensive, or they can only use a certain amount of data.
Data.
And it's okay if they're in shore. They've got shore leave. They can go ashore, and there's somewhere local for them to go, a local McDonald's, etc. But there's quite often in ports where they're not able to get off or find someone they could access Wi-Fi. These units are a goldmine, really. And so that shows there's still a lot of work to do.
Do you think, on that side of it, do you think, the industry seems to have embraced the internet on board ship in a big way? If you go back over 3 or 4 years, some elements of the industry argue that actually giving seafarers access to daily contact with home can also be detrimental, because if there's problems or to do with relationships or something, it can cause a lot of anxiety on board ship and stuff like that. But what are your thoughts on that? Is internet all good, or is it also have to be put into balance?
Well, I disagree with that. I mean, I think if
Yeah.
you look at, if we go on to, and I know this is one other subject we're going to talk about later, is about the retention and recruitment of seafarers, and a big thing is communication, especially with the young people.
Yeah.
You know, we hear frequently of stories of cadets giving up their training program because they're not able to contact. So there's got to find a balance, really. I mean, I think, but more and more communication. And when we've done surveys, or when there's surveys have been done on seafarers' welfare and well-being, communication is the top need. When you ask them that they want, is to be able to communicate home. And we're not saying that they, you know, when they're on board, it's got to be boundaries about when they can access but they need. They're isolated, quite often, very isolated. And if they haven't got access to their family and friends for 9, 10 months, 11 months, 12 months, or they don't know, there's no consistency in them being able to contact their friends and family, that just adds, not only to isolation, but it could add to their mental health and well-being as well. So I think there's ways of doing it. I think that's an excuse, an unfounded excuse, really.
Okay. DOÐUKAN, can I just bring you just slightly in on that point about, the whole issue of well-being? I mean, you're dealing with seafarers, you're dealing with the ships correctly. I think is it more of an issue?
I think well-being is one of those topics that we cannot afford half measures. So for too long, it's been treated as an extra benefit rather than a core part of a job. But if we want to attract and keep the talent, we need to make a well-being part of the employment value proposition. So this means looking at it holistically. We run a dedicated seafarers well-being service with clinician-led psychological assessments and designed for maritime life, not just pre-employment, but also during the service, with clear guidance for both captains and HR. The way that we hire right people, support them continuously, and keep them longer. I mean, of course, another big part of well-being is connectivity. I mean, with technologies like Starlink, and the crew can access reliable internet at sea. So this means video calls with family, online learning, simply streaming in a movie in their cabin. This may sound small, but in reality, they transform the daily life of seafarers, making long voyages more connected, less isolating, and far more human. So it's not only that, it also extends to the daily life on board. I mean, like catering service, we make sure that crews have safe, good quality, culturally respectful food and water with, like I said, remineralized water service, no bottle handling, desk clutter. I mean, small daily frictions can make a big difference to the morale. And as a skill side, good training centers, for example, we provide market trainings and credentials that turn new equipment and regulations into everyday confidence and safe routines. When seafarers feel supported, connected, and fed well, and confident in their skills, well-being becomes part of the system, not just a perk.
Okay. Well, just saying to the other panelists, please just stick your hand up if you want to jump in on this. But just touching on what Shan was saying there with recruitment and retention. I've been in this industry for 4 decades nearly, and I was writing about this way back in the 90s, but the industry needs to build for the future. The industry's changing. You've got to be attracting in the right type of seafarers, and the younger generation now, they're going to have different expectations, and there'll be different demands being placed on them as well. How can the industry build for the future? Who wants to go for that? And then we've got about 11 or 12 minutes left. I will then go in and ask the questions that we've got coming in as well. But how can the industry build on that? Who wants to have an answer on that one? Patricia, do you want to have a little go on that?
I was just looking at the questions. Whoops.
We'll come on to those in a second. Just really looking at retention and the whole thing of crewing, recruitment and
Yes,
retention.
it's a growth industry in Jamaica. We have a university here called the Maritime University here.
Yeah.
Caribbean Maritime University. And, before Caribbean Maritime University opened, I think the number of seafarers, yes, we had a lot of people going on cruise ships because, of course, the cruise ship companies would come here and go through the tourism industry and steal the workers. But those are more hospitality workers than those working in the engine rooms. And so the Caribbean Maritime University changed that equation in that we are not only training people for various types of jobs, but also certifying them and having internship programs with a number of different shipping companies. And that has broadened the idea in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean of these kinds of opportunities. So yes, I have last year we had I interviewed one of our seafarers who is on a gas ship going out of and she's a woman, and talking about the kinds of challenges that she faces as a woman seafarer on ships which are plying in the east.
Yeah.
And she says, well, sometimes it's really difficult because sometimes she's the only woman. And as such, the facilities were not made on the ship for different sexes. So that has been also an issue that had to be dealt with. But she says, because of the fact that she's an engineer, she does have a certain level of hierarchy and therefore can manage the situation. I would think it would be more difficult for someone lower down in the hierarchy with a male-dominated industry.
Yeah.
But she did say that it's like 6 months that she's away, and it's sometimes difficult for her family situation. But again, the question of communication, being able to communicate was identified as one of those things. But I think that, for countries like ours, and if I probably put Latin America in there as well, countries like the Philippines have been doing this for eons. We are pretty new to it. And so we are building the systems. We are engaging to make sure that we understand what's going on. And I think it's been an interesting job opportunity where in small islands there's very little opportunity other than in certain industries. So very important for us here, and I think that it's growing here rather than having major problems.
Bringing you in just very quickly, Sharon, on this point, it was interesting. I attended a conference recently where I think one of the shipping companies, I think it was Scorpio, said that they were looking at having a program where one of their vessels was manned 70% by women, or
wow,
crewed, not manned, apologies, crewed 70% by women, to overcome that issue of isolation and safety for single women on board ship or whatever. What are your thoughts on that with women at sea? I mean, it is a big issue, isn't it? First of all, attracting them in there and also keeping them and looking after them.
Yes, it hasn't changed. Well, I think the opportunities for women have changed, Sean, to be honest with you. I come from a seafaring family, and my brother, when he was younger, was encouraged to go to a Merchant Navy school and to go through the Merchant Navy and become an officer, etc. At no point was I offered those opportunities when I was younger. And I think now there are so much more opportunities. It's still become apparent from what MNWB here and what our constituents here, there is still a unfairness. There is still, from some factors or from some organisations, or from some people rather, that there is still a feeling that women shouldn't be at sea.
Right.
Not greatly, but it's still underlying there. And I think that the opportunities for women are certainly growing, and the awareness are growing. But there's a lot more that needs to be done to sort of increase the outreach to women, and also if you look at the opportunities for so if you're employed by a UK company, there are rules, there's legislation for maternity, paternity pay. If you're a seafarer and you're a woman seafarer and to get maternity and you want to return to sea, the options there are very, very limited, or you quite often can't. And I hear of stories of women that really want to go back to sea, but because they're limited to their options, or the shipping company wouldn't let them. So I think there's still a lot of work to do with equality.
I'm going to bring FABIO in, and then also Christopher. But let's get some of the questions here. Martin Reutermann's 2 million seafarers moving around 80% of the world's trade. Without them, the world would come to a standstill. To paraphrase Churchill, never was so much owed by so many to so few. Still, they have not been recognised as key workers. Why is that? FABIO, what's your thoughts on that?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very good question. I will try to give you some highlights on that. I can see the challenge, right? Because especially if the major flag state holding such a large share of the world tonnage, right? While it's possible that, let's say, their opposition could block or, let's say, not facilitate the net zero framework for entering into force, I believe that the process itself will continue to drive the ambition, right? And also, there is also a clear direction for the industry, as I mentioned at the beginning, right? So already industry start to decide which kind of vessels to order, right? If hydrogen, LNG. So let's say the ball is rolled, right? So let's say it's not anymore an uncertainty in terms of which kind of option, right? Because time is money, right? On that. So I think that is also in terms of regional policy, right, that's already in place. Think about the EU, right, with the EU Fuel Maritime Directive, right, which also make a big step further, right? So these, of course, I would say that in general, the different ship owner, the different, let's say, actors that are involved in the supply chain already make their decision, right, in order to don't left out from the system, right? So I would say this is my briefly, let's say, thought about this question, but it's an important reflection on that, right?
Christopher, I'm going to bring you in now. Just another question that was sent in, very much on the net zero framework. So we've gone back a little bit in our conversation. US is opposed to going from MARC to the net zero. Some large shipping companies are also against the implementation. The IMO will probably succeed in getting enough of the 176 members to vote. But for entry into force, 50% of the world's shipping tonnage is needed. And with Liberia, Panama, and Marshall Islands, about 46.5% of the world's tonnage probably voting against the net zero framework, there's a real chance it will never enter into force. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. I think for those of us who would like to see it come into force, it's frustrating. But I would add that having been on the environmental side of this similar types of negotiations, it doesn't stop action from taking place where it can take place. And I think we really need to look at within our spheres of influence, whether it's at a national level, a sub-regional level, a regional level, and hopefully be able to build a momentum where we can change the perceptions or the positions of others who may not be in support. So I just think that it's a matter of continuing to advocate. It's a matter of making the general public, the constituents, more aware of the implications of some of these decisions at a global level, because that's where ultimately governments are responding in many cases to the pressure of local populations. And I think we need to be able to convey that message wherever and whenever we can, and hopefully see the momentum change in a different direction.
Okay, well, I think really, I mean, the hour is up. I mean, there is, I mean, there's one point, good question here, really, where we talked about, is maritime suffering from a talent shortage or a skill shortage? I am sort of just giving the time to the delegates here. Who wants to answer that question? I mean, Sharon, do you want to have a go at that? Just really, when we talk about talent, they talk about a shortage of seafarers, but they talk about a shortage of competent seafarers, but also the talent that is going to be needed as the industry moves forward with innovation, digitalization, all of that side of it. You are going to need to attract in a different type of person, aren't you?
Most definitely. I think if we look at the UK specifically, Sean, there's been a decline ongoing, as you alluded to before, and it would suggest that it was definitely not keeping pace with the demand.
Yeah.
And although I did on a recent survey, I saw that the cadet numbers are increasing, which is a positive sign, but from a quite low base. It's even I don't know what the stats are for women cadets, but it's very low. I think it was about 7% at one point, which was quite high. So if it continues in the long term, it could help with long-term retention, but the training needs for cadets are changing. There was a lot of discussion in London International Shipping Week about simulators. I attended one discussion which was saying and a seafarer himself said there's too much reliance on a simulator training in cadet training when they should be getting sea time. And another event that I went to spoke about the positives of it, because quite often they don't get the opportunities to drive a ship in real time. So all these and the developments, especially with AI as well, I mean, that's a huge factor and changing on a daily basis. So without a doubt, the training needs are going to have to change. But with the other thing that we're concerned about in the UK is the demographic aging of seafarers suggests that in the future there's going to be many that retire, which poses a risk of the loss of all that experienced seafarers. And unless there's any succession planning and recruitment efforts are made, the step type is going to be serious concern. So from our perspective, and we feel that the UK government should be taking a holistic approach to this and combine raising awareness of going into school. I think really, I mean, the schools, when they do their career advice, seafaring is not, as far as I know, it's not included. So that for a start, promoting maritime careers, promoting them through schools, colleges, public campaigns alongside highlighting the diverse roles, because there's so many different roles that could help and attract new talent. So it's a very, very complex. It's not just one size fits all. There's lots of things that need to be done, but it needs to be coordinated, John.
Well, look, thank you very much, everybody, today. With the breadth of subject matter here, we could go on for another 2 hours, I think, really, and I feel quite sad that some of the elements we haven't given as much time, but we have to be conscious of your time as well as the time of the delegates. So thank you very much indeed, panelists. I'd like to also thank the participants and the delegates who've come in, who've obviously enjoyed it because you've stayed, which is rather good as well. So we do appreciate that. And thank you very much for your questions that you sent in. As I said, just to remind you, the webinar has been video recorded and will be then available on the shipmanagementinternational.com website about a week's time or so, and also via the Maritime Authority of Jamaica. And keep an eye out on social channels as well, because we're whizzing it out as well on that. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very, very much indeed for your time today. I find these debates massively fascinating. Big thanks to the Maritime Authority of Jamaica, who I think do a superb job there in everything they're doing, also at the IMO as well. And speak to you next time. And thank you very much. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much for
much.
this
Thank
opportunity.
you very much.
Thank you.
Enjoyed the
Bye.
conversation.
Bye.
Take care.